without the mic? Okay, all right, so we won't worry about that then. Okay, so immigration is a topic that's been receiving a lot of attention in the media in these past few years, and it's something that affects communities like ours that are on the border tremendously, where we have a large population of immigrants. So, we hear a lot of pundits and commentators in the media make statements. We hear a lot of legislators make statements about immigration. And one of the things that I find is that a lot of times people that are making these types of comments really don't understand the way that our immigration system works. And I frequently am asked to come out and speak to community groups or religious groups or nonprofit organizations about immigration. And I always find that people really don't understand how our immigration system works, and so a lot of times don't really understand where some of the problems that we find ourselves in come from in terms of our immigration laws. So I wanted to spend a few minutes today just talking about the basics, the fundamentals of our immigration legal system, in the hopes of being able to give context to some of the issues that we find ourselves as a nation facing today, and hopefully maybe come up with discuss some possible solutions to some of these issues. So I want to start by talking about the two main ways that people immigrate to the U.S. So we have a family-based immigration system, and we have a business-based, employment-based immigration system. So in the family-based immigration system, you have a set of categories where people are able to immigrate through specific categories if they have specified family relationships. And then you have something very similar on the business immigration side, the employment immigration side, where you have categories, but this time based on the worker's skills. And so you have the different categories, and people are able to immigrate through those categories based on their particular skills. Okay? So these are the two most common ways of immigrating to the U.S. So let's talk a little bit about the family-based immigration system. There's 5 different groups of people that can immigrate. So we have something called immediate relatives, which are spouses and parents and unmarried children under the age of 21 of U.S. citizens. They get the most preference. That's the group that immigrates the fastest. And then you have 4 other preference categories. So one is made up of the over the age of 21 single sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. Another category is reserved for family members of lawful permanent residents, and a lawful permanent resident is someone who's been given permission to live and work in the U.S., and that's what's commonly known as a green card holder. So you have spouses and children of lawful permanent residents as long as the children are unmarried. And then you have a third category for the married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, and then you have the last category, the fourth category, which is siblings of U.S. citizens. So each of these categories has a quota, or a maximum, a ceiling on the number of people that can immigrate through any one category from any one country in any given year. And what's happened, unfortunately, is that the quota system hasn't been updated or hasn't been changed since the 70s. So right now, we're admitting the same number of people under these different preference categories as we were admitting in the 70s. So I'm going to give you the example of the fourth preference category, which is for siblings of U.S. citizens. Okay? So every year, there's only 65,000 visas available in that particular category for the entire worldwide, for everybody. And no one country can get more than 7% of that allocation. So what that's resulted in is, if you have more people applying, especially from one particular country, in any given year, they're going to run out of visas right away. And that's exactly what's been happening for several decades now. So I'm going to give you an example. So I'm a U.S. citizen, and I decide that I want to petition to bring my sibling that happened to be born in Mexico, that I want to bring her to the U.S., and I can file an immigrant petition for her, a family-based immigrant petition. Now, does anyone want to take a guess which petitions are today being processed to give that family member, that sibling, their permanent resident status, when I would have had to have started that process for my sibling in order for her to be at the front of the line now and eligible for her visa today? Does anyone want to guess?
20 years?
Pretty close, yeah. So right now they're processing cases from March of 1997, okay? So if today I file a petition for my sibling is going to be in line behind everybody who has filed between March of 1997 to today, okay? And so, and the other preference categories are just as bad. Adult children of lawful permanent residents, they're processing from like 93. Adult married or even unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, they're in like 94. So yes, I mean, we're talking about huge, huge processing times. And the business-based side of the immigration system is better, but it's still pretty bad. So we have different categories, different numbers of people that can immigrate. We have categories for skilled workers, and we have categories for non-skilled workers. We have many more categories for skilled workers than we do for non-skilled workers, even though non-skilled workers are just as necessary for our economy. I mean, we have temporary working visas as well as permanent visas. But there's one example that I like to give because I think it really shows the need for changes in immigration laws. So agricultural workers, temporary agricultural workers, seasonal agricultural workers, we have a category for them, but unfortunately, there's only about 60-some thousand visas that are available of this type every year. Does anyone want to guess how many workers the agricultural industry says that we need in any given year?
100,000?
Nope.
Higher?
So we have 65,000 visas, agricultural workers. 3 million. So the industry says we need 3 million and we give visas to 65,000. So I mean, it's completely unrealistic, right? And yet, I mean, we all know the laws of supply and demand. We, the United States, demand certain types of labor. The jobs are here and need to be filled. We don't provide mechanisms for people to be able to come here legally to do them. So what ends up happening? People end up coming illegally to do these jobs, to fill these jobs. And so it's the same thing with the family-based. We have a mechanism for people to come legally if they have these relationships, but we tell them it's going to take 20 years. And so unfortunately, a lot of times people can't stay separated from their family members for 20 years, and that's how we see the problem of illegal immigration, where we have people in the United States who are undocumented. And you know, one of the things that really angers me the most that I hear on TV is, well, why can't these people just come legally? Well, this is exactly why they can't come legally, because our laws don't allow it. So this is why we need to look at comprehensive immigration reform to really change. I mean, for one thing, the quotas, we haven't changed them in 30 years. On the business-based side of it, they're finally starting to make changes, especially in the STEM field. So in recent years, we've had a lot of changes in the STEM field, recognizing that people from all over the world come and study in our universities, get degrees in science, engineering, technology, and math, and then if we don't provide the mechanism for them to be able to stay, they end up going back home. And so luckily, we've started recognizing that and providing more benefits for STEM students. But we still have a lot of students who unfortunately at some point have been without proper status and aren't going to be able to take advantage of those avenues. Because once you've been in the US undocumented, you're not able to have an employer. You can be the brightest kid in your class or in your university, but if you've been undocumented, an employer can no longer sponsor you for a work visa without you having to go back home to your country and then being penalized by separate provisions of the law that punish you for being here illegally in the first place, so then you're not able to come back. So our laws really perpetuate this cycle of unlawful status for folks. Okay. So there's a couple of things that have been mentioned, a couple of new programs specifically that President Obama has passed or has tried to pass during his tenure as president. So one thing that I always explain to communities is that just because the president wants something doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So here in the U.S., only Congress can change our immigration laws. The president can talk all he wants about wanting to change the immigration laws, but he can't do it on his own. And we saw this even when George W. Bush was president in 2007. He started trying to really have a serious conversation about immigration reform and passing major immigration overhaul to deal with some of these issues. And unfortunately, he couldn't get it done. President Obama has been trying to get it done, and unfortunately, he hasn't been able to get it done either. But what President Obama has recently started to do is look at the power that he has within the executive branch. So as the head of the executive branch, he's in charge of the various departments that enforce our immigration laws and implement our immigration laws. So what he did was look to see how he could use the power that he has, not changing the laws, but using the power that he has to try to help specific groups of people. And this is something that's not new to President Obama. Presidents have been doing this since the 1950s, where specific groups, specific populations of people have been designated for specific types of benefits under the immigration law. So it's nothing new, but again, hearing some of the commentators on TV, it's some craziness that President Obama came up with all on his own. But so what we've seen is two major programs that President Obama has announced. And the first one was announced in June of 2012, which was the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So basically what happened is there's this piece of legislation that's been stuck in Congress since 2001 called the DREAM Act. And so the DREAM Act would create a whole new way to obtain lawful permanent resident status for students, for young people who were brought to the U.S. at a young age and completed their schooling here and wanted to go on to college or join the military. So these students would be provided a pathway to lawful permanent residence because of the fact that they are students, they're doing well in school and they want to go further in their career, they want to join the military. So this piece of legislation has unfortunately been stuck in Congress since 2001. And so President Obama decided that this was going to be the first group of people that he really was going to try to target and try to help. So he implemented a program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals that basically seeks to help the same people that would eventually or hopefully one day qualify for the DREAM Act if the DREAM Act became law. But his program is only temporary because it can't be permanent. Again, he can't change the laws on his own. So what he did was create this program where these students, if someone entered the U.S. before they turned 16 years of age, if they'd been continuously physically present in the U.S. since June of 2007, if they hadn't been convicted of a felony or any significant misdemeanors, and if they had completed high school or obtained their GED or were currently in school or had been honorably discharged from the military, these individuals could apply for deferred action status. And that meant that the government was actually classifying them as a low priority for deportation. The government was saying, okay, well, we know you're here, we know you don't have status, but we're going to give you this deferred action, which means you're not an enforcement priority for us. We're gonna kind of leave you alone because you're not getting in trouble, you're in school, you're doing good things. And we're gonna let you have employment authorization for a 2-year period so that you can continue with your studies, you can get a social security number, you can get a driver's license, and importantly, when you graduate from college, you can actually use your degree in your field. So that was deferred action for childhood arrivals. This past November, President Obama expanded that program. He took off an age limit. Before, you couldn't have been more than 31 years of age, even if you met all the other requirements. Now that age limit is gone, so you can be, it doesn't matter how old you are, as long as you meet all of the other requirements, you can get deferred action. And then he also moved up the date a little bit. So before, you had to have been here since June 15th of 2007. Now it's January 1st of 2010. So they're expecting that many more students will now be able to take advantage of this program. The other major program that President Obama announced in November is something that they're calling Deferred Action for Parental Accountability, which is meant to target parents of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents who may not have any status here in the U.S. And it's very similar to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. There's very strict criteria. But basically, this is done in recognition of the fact that, unfortunately, just because you have U.S. citizen children doesn't mean that a parent is protected from deportation. A parent can be deported just for being here in the U.S. without status, even though they have U.S. citizen children. There is no automatic immigration benefit that's granted to parents of U.S. citizen children. And sadly, every single day, we see parents of U.S. citizen children being deported from the country. So again, in the hopes that Congress will one day be able to pass some kind of immigration reform that may include some kind of path to lawful permanent residence for people, President Obama established this program where parents who meet certain criteria, who've been here since at least January of 2010, who don't have felonies, who aren't a danger to the community, and who have U.S. citizen children and lawful permanent resident children, they can apply for deferred action, which is, again, protection against deportation by being marked a low priority, and employment authorization, which, of course, will help a lot of these folks be able to provide for their children better. So these are two big programs that have been passed, that have been implemented by the president in the past couple of years. And it's really, with the deferred action for childhood arrivals, I was surprised that not as many young people as were estimated were eligible applied. And now with the Deferred Action for Parents program, we have no way of knowing how many people are going to apply. It's estimated that out of the 11 million undocumented immigrants that we have in the U.S., that as many as 5 million might be able to qualify for this program. But really, we just don't know. We have no idea. And it's all going to come down to, once the application period opens in May, how many people actually apply. Now, when I go out and talk to groups, one of the things that I find a lot is that people are very suspicious. And we have to remember, people come from countries where the last thing that you trust is what your government tells you. And so a lot of people, think it's a ploy. They think, oh yeah, they want us to sign up so that they know where we are. And so a lot of the community outreach that I do is to explain that the information that's provided as part of the application process for these two programs is not shared with the enforcement arm of the immigration agencies unless someone's deemed to be a threat to the security of the U.S. But for most people, that's not going to be the case. So what I try to do in my outreach is really encourage people to apply, because the benefits really are great. I mean, you get employment authorization, people get to come out of the shadows, they can find real and consistent and gainful employment with which to be able to support their families. And most importantly, they don't have to live with the fear of every single day that when they leave their house of maybe being caught by Border Patrol and being deported and separated from their kids. But there's we have to overcome a lot of fear within the immigrant community. So as far as how many people are going to apply here in the El Paso area, it's impossible to know. It's impossible to know. But hopefully, folks like you all will be able to spread the message about why it is important for people to really look into whether or not they're eligible for these benefits. Okay, so that's my